Fellow St. Lucians, we are back with the second segment of our program, and I now call on Dr. Preville to take the lead.
Thank you, Michael. And you know, in the first segment, we began discussing some issues to do with manufacturing. And I think if manufacturing has to take off, there are a couple of things that need to happen. And top of the list is to have the right policy environment. You know, we mentioned investment already. We have to have an environment that's going to lure investors. And how do you lure investors? You lure investors by one, you know, essentially signaling. You say to investors what your economy is about, what your vision is. There is a long-term strategy of achieving that vision, and what sectors you are targeting for investment. If that is very clear to investors, then foreign investment is going to start flowing. Now, when I looked at one of the major constraints that I see right now to the light manufacturing sector in St. Lucia and perhaps the entire sub-region is the VAT, the value-added tax regime. And I looked at the VAT in Trinidad and Tobago. I looked at the VAT in St. Kitts, Nevis. That's like the polar opposites of CARICOM. Small, large, very large, and very small. And I looked at those in between, Barbados, St. Lucia itself, St. Vincent, and some others. And one sees that there are varying rates of VAT, number one. There is a lot of variation in the products that are on the exempted or zero list, right? They have the two lists, some are zero, some exempt. And there is a lot of variation in the thresholds by which you start paying VAT. I believe there is a need to have a harmonization of the products that are zero rated, those that are exempted, and the thresholds, at least among the OECS countries, to the extent that we have an economic union. And an economic union is a single market, essentially. We should have harmonization so that there will be no distortion in prices or no distortion in competitiveness across those economies. The other thing that I think needs to happen, and Barbados has led the region in that regard, is the question of materials and equipment entering for subsequent production and processing in St. Lucia. Those should be VAT exempted, because essentially what it is that it's tying up working capital in warehouses that may take 6 months, 1 year before the processing happens. And then on top of that now you have the convoluted process of VAT refunds, the rebates. So what it does, it drives the manufacturing cost up. And interestingly, when I looked at both St. Kitts, Nevis, and Trinidad and Tobago, I found that the experiences of both countries with VAT in the manufacturing sector was identical. They were saying the same thing, that VAT affected the competitiveness of the local businesses vis-a-vis the foreign businesses, and the temporary removal of VAT from imported food items should be implemented on some foreign products and raw materials, in the case of the TTMA, Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. So I believe that there is a need to do the two things I mentioned. One, send the right signal to St. Lucians and the rest of the world in terms of where the investment flow should come. And secondly, provide the right policy environment. And at this point, I think the VAT exemption on inputs, imported inputs into production, would facilitate a boost of the sector.
Haley, I've listened carefully to what Claudius has said, and I would like you to respond to it. But before doing that, you can probably confirm what I know. Trinidad is an unusual country because of its great oil wealth, but they have taken off the VAT either completely or, I know, on all food items, I think so, subject to correction, and on many others. What is your feedback?
I think there's been heavy focus on reducing the VAT burden on basic food stuff. Obviously, the harshest penalties would be applied to luxury items. That particular segment is still heavily gets the maximum VAT rate, and understandably so.
Tell me something. Just I know you only been in St. Lucia 6 months, and you have a lot of clients who come in to see you because of the situation here. What has been the response or the people's views on the VAT situation in St. Lucia?
The initial response across the Caribbean, all the jurisdictions upon initial introduction of VAT has been the same. I mean, it's a shock initially, and it does create some
upheaval.
That happened in Trinidad, that happened in Barbados, it happened throughout the Caribbean.
Do you feel that in time that we'll be able to absorb the 15% shock, or should the government be concerned about reducing the shock, relieving the shock, the pressures, by saying coming back to a 7.5% VAT for a period until the recession eases up on us, just like Barbados has just done in the tourism sector, from 15% to 7.5%. And in addition to that, I was actually on the phone only this morning to some hoteliers in Barbados who have indicated that based on the recent discussions with Sandals, a number of hotels in Barbados have received concessions. And last week, I had Mr. Destan here, who's a financial expert and who really had his facts and figures correct. And he indicated to us, to the public, that on a 15-day vacation in Barbados, they were $2,000 cheaper than St. Lucia, and St. Lucia is the most heavily taxed in the OECS, and he actually presented the figures for that. Now, if these figures are indeed correct, what should the government do about it? Because competition you cannot get rid of, and once people bypass you, the most difficult customer to get back, and I've learned that, is the one that you have lost. So based on all of that, on what you have seen so far between Trinidad and St. Lucia, what kind of advice would you offer without being too strong about it, because you see the clients coming before you?
Well, my understanding, let me start by saying that my understanding is that VAT was supposed to be introduced, and at the same time there was supposed to be some adjustments with respect to other taxes. And I'm not too sure whether those adjustments have taken place. So that there was to be an element of balance around the introduction of VAT. So that is a consideration, whether those adjustments took place or not, and whether therefore the burden was softened a bit in that way. What is going to happen, I think, is what happened in the various Caribbean territories, where I'm assuming that the state is going to look at the impact, because what happens with a regressive, when a tax is introduced and is regressive, is that you don't meet your targets in terms of tax collections. So you have the economy being hit by the imposition of a tax, and you have the double whammy of the tax targets not being met, and therefore the fiscal deficit worsening. So I expect that the government, as any government will take those things into consideration and look carefully at and make adjustments as are required. I expect that would be the case.
I can give you some information. I had on my show Mr. Richard Peterkin, who is a well-recognized finance and accountant gentleman
Yes.
in St. Lucia. And I don't know whether he was asked by government, or I believe he was asked by government, to go into Inland Revenue and revisit after 1 year the situation. And his findings were that when you add the VAT collections, Inland Revenue and Customs, to date, they were equivalent to exactly what the Inland Revenue and Customs were without the VAT. What does that tell you? It means, therefore, that businesses have contracted, and despite the fact that some $300 million, I think that was the figure I heard, that was collected for VAT, we are back at A. In the process, you have upset the business community, you have put them on the defensive, and you know, people get extremely nervous. If I came to you, borrowed your money, give you a mortgage on my home, and I can't pay my bills, I'm losing my home. So it will become very nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And I think government needs to really understand that decisions are made, and there is absolutely nothing wrong when a decision is made to retract if it's not working. We do it in business all the time. You do it in your banking. I mean, you can do certain things and you have to pull back. I've been in the shipping business for 25 years. I owned 31 ships, okay, over a period. And I distinctly recall that the last ship I bought, which was a 7,000-ton ship, turned out to be not what I expected. I had to cut my losses. And I remember I lost 50% of that ship within a year and a half. And I cut my losses and I had to get rid of it. So these things happen. And I don't want to blame governments or politicians, but by the same token, we are all human beings. We can make errors, but when there's an error, that error needs to be retracted. How do you take it?
I'm with you on this. The truth of the matter is, when I study VAT, the VAT regimes throughout CARICOM, in general, I am not convinced that the member states are better off as a result of VAT. And I'm not surprised at the numbers you were calling out from Richard Pittikin.
Yeah.
Because in a manner, when you impose a tax like 15% across the board, what you're doing, you're forcing aggregate consumption to shrink. Demand has to shrink, you know. What we don't understand is that a number of people are living at the margin. And because, let us say, somebody can afford to pay a doctor $100 for a medical visit, don't take it for granted that if you increase it to $115, you will still have a visit. You may start losing a lot of visitors.
In fact, if
that
I want,
extra
let me just
$1 could make a difference, much less $15.
Yeah, I can tell you, as a fact, what you're saying is so correct. Because if you go to Tapion Hospital, there are about 8 or 9 doctors.
Yes.
And I have spoken to those doctors.
Yes.
And they told me their business is down tremendously.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, 3 years ago, when you went in to make an appointment, they said, well, can you make it in 3 days' time?
Yes.
You can come in right now.
Yes.
So what does it tell you?
It says a lot.
Correct.
And so, the problem you have is that if the VAT, the impact is to cause the aggregate demand to shrink. And if aggregate demand is shrinking, the tax you were expecting to collect at a certain level, you will not collect.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know why governments don't seem to get it, but as a government, what you want to do is to facilitate growth of private companies, because the private companies are the ones who will generate new value in the economy, and the new value generated is something long-term, permanent, and sustainable that becomes part of your formal tax collection. There's been numerous studies on the rate of taxation in any economy and the amount of tax revenue collected. What all those studies show, and there is a famous economist called Laffer, Laffer, who did a work on this, and what he showed, initially as you increase the rate of taxation, you get more revenue. At a certain point, it starts to go down. And the question I have is, and it's a question to all the economists in the Ministry of Finance, Has anyone sat down and tried to at least estimate where that Laffer curve is for St. Lucian economy? I suspect is a lot lower than 15%. And so what government should focus on is marginal revenue, not revenue it may have if everybody pays, but no one is paying because it's too high, or nobody is consuming, so the payments are not being done. Government has to focus on getting more people to consume. And the way you do that is to try and estimate what tax rate will make it happen. You set that tax rate, and then your consumption expands. One other observation I've made, I live on the Mon, so when I drive to work on mornings, I always look into the pot. And I see all those dozens of automobiles imported from the United States, Japan, and so on, rotting on the docks. Why? Government wants 125, 130% in taxes on those vehicles. The vehicles dry rot, they eventually have to be destroyed. Government gets zero revenue. Now let's say the average used car is about $10,000 US. Wouldn't government be better off collecting, let us say, $5,000 US?
Yeah, right.
That goes to the coffers. And if it collects that on 100 used cars, it has some revenue, as opposed to looking for 125% on a used car, right? And only gets revenue on about 5 or 10 of them. So this is the problem you have. I believe tax reform in general has to happen, in general. VAT is one of those that really affect producers and consumers, but customs duties and other areas need to be looked at as well.
I want to respond on 2 points. The first one is with Mr. Gonzalez in St. Vincent, and the second one is about Bermuda. Let us take Mr. Gonzalez. Prior to our VAT implementation, we had the pleasure of moving to St. Vincent to do some supermarkets. And I learned down there from the Ministry of Finance, because we are in active partnership with the government of St. Vincent on a supermarket. And I was told that there was over $100 million in uncollectible VAT in St. Vincent. Okay? And as a matter of fact, we're now in the year 2014, 2012, I think it was, around November. You know what the government actually did in St. Vincent? They set up a lottery and told the people, whoever paid on the delinquent tax, they would have a number, and whoever won would get a $300,000 prize. So they were encouraging people to come in to pay. That's how bad it was.
Yes.
And I did mention it here to Dr. Anthony and warned him what was happening in St. Vincent could easily happen here in St. Lucia. He should be cautious. He had a very good relationship with Dr. Gonzalez. He needed to speak to him as one Minister of Finance to the other. The second thing about the car situation, I take your point. You are correct, but by the same token, have you been to Bermuda?
No, not
okay.
no.
I have been to Bermuda on more than one occasion. And the law in Bermuda is you never see those huge cars in Bermuda. You cannot sell a car in St. Lucia, in Bermuda, over 4 years of age.
Yes.
And when you sell that car, it cannot be sold if there is one spot of rust or a broken light on it. What are we doing now is that we are desperate for foreign exchange, all of us. Why are we getting rid of our foreign exchange with a number of vehicles that are coming in? I think there'd be some sort of regulation where people should be made to hold a car for a certain number of years, take care of their vehicles, and do the necessary, because it is bleeding us. I mean, we should have priorities for our foreign exchange. Medication is one of the areas. Everybody has spoken vociferously concerning dropping the VAT on medication. And also, people will get sick. This is your nation. And I think that is a priority where our foreign exchange should be earmarked a certain percentage for medication. And then, of course, the rest comes. You have education, and as Hayden quite rightly pointed out a while ago, you have the agricultural section. And instead of government using monies to put into large-scale buildings. These monies should really be going in to promote those projects to increase employment on the island.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Your take.
No, and I can't disagree. I mean, one of the aims of a punitive tax would be to discourage consumption of imported vehicles that may have an impact on the environment or on the quality of life. So that aspect has to be perhaps taken into consideration. But you know, I think that the same process of finding the position on that curve is what the other countries in the region have done, though not consciously. Because you start off at 15 and then you make adjustments depending on particular products as you I guess more fully understand the impact of the tax. And that is why most of the regions, bar none, started off at a number, and if you look at where they are now, it's markedly different in terms of VAT imposition from where they started off. They've adjusted and so on. One of the other consequences of VAT imposition, which we have to be concerned about, is that it can also drive a portion of your economy to underground. Yes. These are the people who evade, avoid paying VAT. These are the business transactions. So these people disappear from the economic scope, and they are no longer visible to the tax authorities or to the formal economy. So you have a segment of the economy that is operating, as it happens in Jamaica as a good example. Business is being transacted, and that segment hardens, and it becomes a segment of the economy that is informal, and people go to, and that is one of the consequences of rigid imposition of a tax that is regressive, that we have to be concerned about.
We have just ended the second segment of our program. This is Open Mic. We'll be right back.